Hi and welcome to the last module of your Excel Advanced course. In this module we'll be looking at some basic macros. We'll be looking at recording macros, playing them back, assigning them to objects on the actual sheet itself and assigning them to buttons in the quick access toolbar. Now it may well be that you don't know what a macro is, although I'm sure at the level that you're at you may have heard of the term before, either at work or elsewhere. The best way I would say to describe what a macro is it's a recording of something that you do repeatedly. So for example, let's imagine that you regularly, once a week or once a month, have to download information from another system. And when you've downloaded it into Excel, you always have to delete, let's say, columns D, M and P, and you always have to delete the same certain rows every time, and you always have to select the same group of cells to change formatting. Now it can be very tiresome repeating those steps every single month or week whenever you have to do it. So what you can do is you can record yourself doing it on one occasion. When you've stopped recording, you can then assign that recording to a button or an object, which we'll be looking at in this session. And then the next time you have to perform those same steps, well, you've downloaded your data into Excel, all you have to do is click on that button or object, and all of those steps will be performed for you. So it really is your own way of creating shortcuts for processes that you conduct in Excel that are repetitive, long-winded, but the same steps every single time. So in this first section of the module, we're going to be looking at how we can record a macro and store it within a workbook and save that particular workbook as a macro enabled workbook. We're going to play the macro back. We won't assign it to objects straight away, that will be in the second section. Okay, so one thing I would say, as you can see looking in front of you, looking at the screen itself, I've got a spreadsheet here that tracks some sales figures over a year for chocolate sales, crisp sales and biscuit sales. Now what I would like to do here is eventually what I'm working towards doing is having a little arrow up here that points down, and whenever I click on that arrow it will always take me down to the next heading in this particular workbook or in this worksheet. We'll then also have another arrow next to it that points up, that whenever we click it will take us back up to the heading above. So because of the layout of this particular worksheet, we're looking at moving down about 6 or 7 cells every single time because it's the same number of salespeople. What I would recommend before you record your macro is that you practice it once first to make sure that you are happy with all the steps involved, particularly if it's quite a long-winded process. Maybe even write down each step of what you have to do and sort of tick it off as you've performed it. Because if you're in the middle of recording a macro and then the telephone goes, it can be quite off-putting if you're not sure what stage you've got to. So let's have a start at recording. So the macro is going to record me moving from this cell here, well, whichever cell I'm clicked on, down 7 cells. That's what this macro is doing, moving down 7 cells. So to start recording the macro, we make sure we're clicked in the right spot, and then we go to View at the top, and at the very end we click Macros and Record Macro. Now underneath Record Macro is a rather important button called Use Relative References. I'm not actually going to turn it on. I should turn it on, but I'm actually going to do this wrong the first time because I want you to see the impact that it will have. So let me go to Record Macro, and when you give a macro a name, it cannot have spaces in it. So I'm going to call this Move Down. In the old days with Excel, I did used to teach people to assign shortcut keys, That basically means that if instead of having an arrow that you click on to move down 7 cells, you can do Control-Shift-D, for example. But I have to be honest with you, in more recent years, these have only presented problems using this, so I don't use them anymore. And this macro recording is going to be stored just in this workbook. I will talk to you about some of the other options there in a later section of this particular module. Now, the description box is really optional, but if ever you move jobs or leave the company and somebody inherits your worksheet, then it would be useful for them, if they're looking at your macros, to get an idea of what the recordings actually do. So I'm going to type just something along the lines of this macro moves down. So we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 cells. Okay, so we click on OK. And how do we know we're being recorded? Well, down in the bottom left-hand corner of your status bar, you can see a square has appeared. And when you hover, it tells you that a macro is currently recording. When we have stopped, we will click here. When we wish to stop, rather, we will click here to end the recording. So I'm now being recorded. By the way, it doesn't record the time you're taking. It's just recording your actions within Excel. So I now click on the next heading down, and that's all I'm recording myself doing, moving down 7 cells. So I come down to the bottom and I stop recording. So now it's important that I test that out. So let me go back to chocolate sales, and to test it out, I go to macros and view macros. There's the macro called move down. I click run. Lovely, it moved from chocolate sales to crisp sales, but we shouldn't end the testing there. Let's try it out once more and run it again, because what we'd actually like to happen is for it to now move to biscuit sales, but it's not doing that. And the reason why is because before starting to record this, I didn't use relative references. I didn't turn it on. So without it turned on, it didn't actually record me moving down 7 cells. It recorded me moving down to A14. It's a bit like the dollars there. It's a bit like it's fixed. It's just recording me moving to that particular cell. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to chocolate sales again. I'm going to go to macros and record macro. I'm going to give it exactly the same name. Again, move down. It's stored in this workbook. I shan't bother with a description in this example, but ordinarily, obviously, you should. When I click on OK, it will say, do you want to replace the one that's called that? Yes, I do. So I just need to, you can turn this on at any point, by the way, use relative references. So I could have turned it on before recording, but it's fine to turn it on now as well. So I click on that. So it's now going to be, because I've turned that button on, when I click on crisp sales, it's actually recording me, not moving to A14, but moving down 7 cells. So I can now stop, and then let's test that out. So I'll stay on crisp sales, go to macros, view macros, and run. Lovely. Try it once more, view macros, and run. So we can see there that it's working perfectly. It's moving me down 7 cells each time. So let's now record the new macro called move up. It's the same as before, it's stored in this workbook. Again, I'm not going to worry about a description on this occasion. Now, relative referencing is still turned on, which is what I want. You can tell it's turned on because there's sort of like a grey outer edge to it. So I don't need to click on it again. So all I need to do is click on the heading above, and it's recording me clicking on the 7th cell up. I go down to the bottom to stop recording, and let's test it out. So let's view our macros. We've now got move up and move down, so let's move up and run. Perfect. Let's try it out once more to be sure. Move up and run. So we've recorded 2 macros there. Now, in order to store those macros within this workbook, we need to go to File and Save As. And we can keep it called Large Spreadsheet, but we need to make sure that underneath that, we don't save it as an Excel workbook. we save it as an Excel macro enabled workbook. You can see the M at the end of the extension there. And then we click on save. This will save your macros within the workbook. Don't fret, if you forget to do that, you are prompted to when you click on save. Okay, so that is the end of the first section where we've looked at recording the macro, the importance of turning relative on in that particular example, and then also we've looked at how important it is to save it as a macro enabled workbook. In the following section, I will show you how you can edit the macro, delete the macro, and also assign it to those arrows at the top of the screen.